Rebecca Davis clutched her worn leather valise tightly against her chest as the train screeched to a halt at Willow Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1872. The platform ahead seemed to sway beneath her anxious gaze, or perhaps it was just her trembling legs betraying the fear she'd fought to conceal during the 5-day journey from Boston. This was supposed to be the beginning of her new life, not the continuation of her nightmare. "Last stop for Willow Creek," the conductor bellowed, his voice cutting through the hissing steam. Rebecca rose slowly, adjusting the modest blue traveling dress she'd sewn herself, the nicest garment she owned. At 22, she had aged beyond her years, working as a seamstress since her parents' deaths had left her alone in the world. The advertisement from Mr. Harold Mitchell had seemed a blessing, a respectable merchant in Wyoming seeking a bride. His letters had been courteous, if not romantic, promising a comfortable home and proper treatment. It was more than she could hope for in Boston, where her prospects dwindled with each passing season. "Come along now, Mrs. Mitchell-to-be," the conductor said kindly, offering his hand. "Your future husband will be waiting." She smiled weakly at the man who had shown her small kindnesses during the journey west. "Thank you, sir." The late afternoon sun beat down as Rebecca descended onto the wooden platform, squinting against the harsh light. Willow Creek was nothing like the bustling streets of Boston. A single dirt road stretched through the center of town, lined with weather-beaten buildings. Dust swirled around her ankles as she searched the sparse crowd for the face she knew only from a faded daguerreotype, a thin-faced man with a neat mustache. Instead, a tall figure approached, hat pulled low over his eyes. "Miss Davis." The voice was gruff, nothing like the refined tone in the letters. "Mr. Mitchell," she asked, her voice catching. He nodded curtly, taking her valise without meeting her eyes. "The wagon's this way." Rebecca followed, confusion clouding her thoughts. The man before her bore little resemblance to the image she carried, and his demeanor chilled her. Still, she reasoned, appearances could be deceiving, and the journey had been long. Perhaps things would improve once they reached his home. They walked in silence until they reached a wagon at the edge of town. Rebecca climbed up awkwardly, her corset restricting her movements. Mitchell tossed her valise in the back with little care for its contents, then climbed up beside her, keeping a deliberate distance. "Is it far to your home, Mr. Mitchell?" she ventured as they pulled away from the station. "We ain't going there just yet," he muttered, flicking the reins. "Got business to attend to first." Rebecca's heart quickened. "I don't understand." Mitchell finally turned to look at her, his eyes cold and calculating. "Things have changed since I wrote those letters, Miss Davis. My business is failing. I'm moving on from Willow Creek." "Moving on," she repeated, her fingers gripping the edge of the wagon seat. "But what of our arrangement?" A humorless smile crossed his face. "That's what we're about to settle." The wagon rounded a corner, bringing them to a section of town Rebecca hadn't glimpsed from the station, a row of saloons and establishments of questionable repute. Mitchell pulled the wagon to a stop outside the largest building, its weathered sign proclaiming it the Silver Dollar. "Wait here," he ordered, jumping down. Rebecca sat frozen, a sense of dread building within her chest. Through the open doors of the saloon, she could see men gathered around tables, drinking and playing cards. The raucous laughter that spilled out made her shrink against the seat. Mitchell returned moments later, followed by a burly man with a red beard and a calculating expression. The stranger circled the wagon, eyeing Rebecca as one might assess livestock. "She's a bit thin," the man remarked, "but pretty enough. Can she cook?" "Says she can in her letters," Mitchell replied. "And she's a seamstress, worth every penny Jenkins." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Mr. Mitchell, what is happening here?" Mitchell avoided her gaze. "Like I said, my circumstances have changed. Jenkins here owns the Silver Dollar. He's looking for a new girl to serve drinks and entertain." "No," Rebecca whispered, understanding dawning with horrific clarity. "I came here to be your wife, not to. You came here because I paid your train fare," Mitchell cut in. "And now Jenkins is paying me back with interest." $200, Jenkins announced, pulling out a wad of bills. "Final offer." Rebecca lunged for the other side of the wagon, but Mitchell caught her arm in a vise-like grip. "Don't make this difficult," he hissed. "You've got no money, no family looking for you. Be sensible. Please," she begged, tears filling her eyes. "This isn't right." "You can't sell a person. It's done all the time out here," Jenkins said matter-of-factly. "Called a marriage contract transfer if it makes you feel better, though we won't be marrying." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by Rebecca's distress, but no one intervened. In the West, a man's business was his own, and few would challenge what appeared to be a domestic dispute. As Mitchell dragged her from the wagon, Rebecca's foot caught in her skirt, and she stumbled to the dusty ground. The valise spilled open, scattering her meager possessions: a Bible, a hairbrush, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the carefully folded wedding dress she'd sewn with such hope. "Get up," Mitchell commanded. "Don't embarrass yourself further." "I think the lady said no." The voice was deep and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the gathering crowd. Rebecca looked up through her tears to see a tall man stepping forward from the shadows of the nearby livery stable. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim, dusty boots, a faded blue shirt, and a weathered Stetson that shaded piercing blue eyes. Unlike the others, he didn't seem entertained by her plight. "This ain't your concern, Warrington," Mitchell snapped. "When a man tries to sell a woman at the train station, it becomes everyone's concern," the cowboy replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. He moved closer, and Rebecca noticed the gun holstered at his hip. He didn't touch it, but his stance made it clear he knew how to use it. "She's my mail-order bride," Mitchell argued. "I paid good money to marry her, not to traffic her," the cowboy interrupted. "Miss," he addressed Rebecca directly. "Is this the arrangement you agreed to?" Rebecca shook her head, finding her voice. "No, sir, I came to be a wife, not." "Not what they're suggesting." The cowboy nodded once, then turned to Mitchell and Jenkins. "How much?" "What?" Mitchell asked, confusion replacing his anger. "How much are you selling her for?" "200, Jenkins replied, a calculating gleam in his eye. Without hesitation, the cowboy reached into his vest and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out the bills deliberately, each one punctuating the tense silence that had fallen over the gathering. $200, he said, holding out the money to Mitchell. Mitchell looked between the money and the cowboy, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "What's your game, Warrington?" "No game." The cowboy's expression remained impassive, just settling a debt to humanity. After a moment's hesitation, Mitchell snatched the money. "She's all yours, then." Jenkins spat on the ground. "You're overpaying, Warrington. She won't last a week out on that ranch of yours." The cowboy ignored him, turning instead to Rebecca, who was still on the ground, clutching her scattered possessions to her chest. He crouched down to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "Miss, my name is Kyle Warrington," he said quietly. "I have no intention of claiming any rights over you. You're free now. Free to stay in town, free to take the next train east, free to do whatever you choose." Rebecca stared at him, uncomprehending. "Free," he nodded, offering his hand to help her up. "Entirely so. I'd be happy to advance you the fare back to Boston if that's your wish." She took his hand cautiously, allowing him to assist her to her feet. His calloused palm was warm against hers, the touch brief but oddly reassuring. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" A shadow crossed his face. "Because I've seen what happens to women with no choices in these parts. It's not a fate I'd wish on anyone." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the drama had concluded without further spectacle. Mitchell and Jenkins retreated to the saloon, the former counting his money with obvious satisfaction. "I have nowhere to go," Rebecca admitted, the reality of her situation crashing down upon her. And no money for a return fare. Kyle considered her for a moment. I have a proposal, but understand you're under no obligation to accept. I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles outside of town. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, is getting on in years and has been asking for help. The position would include room, board, and fair wages until you decide what you want to do next. Rebecca hesitated, weighing her limited options. This man had just spent a small fortune to free her from an uncertain fate, but experience had taught her to be wary of men's generosity. Would I be working as your housekeeper, or are there other expectations? She asked directly. A faint smile touched his lips, respect flickering in his eyes at her forthrightness. Just as a housekeeper, Miss Davis, you'd have your own quarters in the main house, and Mrs. Abernathy would be there as well. I give you my word as a gentleman. Something in his steady gaze convinced Rebecca he was speaking the truth. While caution urged her to find another solution, pragmatism recognized she had few alternatives. I accept your offer, Mr. Warrington, she said finally, until I can earn enough for my return fare. He nodded, then bent to help gather her scattered belongings, treating each item with care. When he picked up her wedding dress, he handed it to her with gentle reverence. Perhaps you'll still have use for this someday, Miss Davis, under happier circumstances. Rebecca tucked it away, trying to ignore the sting of her crushed dreams. Perhaps, she murmured, though in that moment the very idea of marriage had become tainted. Kyle loaded her valise into his wagon, a more substantial vehicle than Mitchell's, with a canvas cover to protect against the elements. We should get moving if we want to reach the ranch before nightfall, he said, unless you'd prefer to stay in town tonight. Rebecca glanced back at the dusty street, at the silver dollar where Mitchell and Jenkins had disappeared, at the curious faces still watching from windows and doorways. No, she decided. I'd rather leave this place behind. As Kyle helped her into the wagon, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that she was trading one uncertainty for another. But as the horses pulled away from Willow Creek, the weight on her chest eased slightly. Whatever lay ahead at the Warrington Ranch, it had to be better than what she'd narrowly escaped. The wagon rattled along a rutted dirt road, leaving the modest buildings of Willow Creek behind. Rebecca sat straight-backed beside her unlikely savior, maintaining a proper distance between them. Kyle Warrington handled the reins with easy confidence, his attention seemingly focused on the journey ahead, though she occasionally felt his gaze upon her. I should thank you properly, Mr. Warrington, she said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. What you did back there was extraordinary. It was the right thing to do, he replied simply, and please call me Kyle. Then I'm Rebecca. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her. $200 is a considerable sum. Won't you miss it? A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Cattle prices have been good this season. I can afford it. The landscape opened before them as they traveled rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, distant mountains standing sentinel against the vast Wyoming sky. Despite her ordeal, Rebecca couldn't help but marvel at the wild beauty surrounding them. It's not Boston, Kyle observed, noting her wide-eyed gaze. No, she agreed. It's bigger somehow, more honest. That's a charitable way to describe it after your welcome to the territory. Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap. I was naive to trust a stranger's letters. No, he said firmly. You were courageous to seek a better life. Mitchell is the one who should bear the shame, not you. His defense surprised her, warming something within her that had grown cold during her ordeal. Tell me about your ranch, she requested, eager to change the subject. Kyle's expression lightened. It's called Whispering Pines. My father staked the claim 15 years ago when I was just a boy of 13. We built it up from nothing, started with 20 head of cattle and now run over 500. Your father must be proud of what you've accomplished together. A shadow passed over his face. He passed 3 winters ago, pneumonia. I'm sorry, Rebecca said softly. I lost my parents to influenza 2 years ago. Their eyes met briefly in shared understanding before Kyle returned his attention to the road. Besides Mrs. Abernathy, there's Hank Thompson, my foreman, and 3 ranch hands, Joe, Miguel, and Charlie. Good men, all of them. They live in the bunkhouse, while Mrs. Abernathy has a room off the kitchen in the main house. And where will I be staying? Rebecca asked, trying to picture her new temporary home. There's a small bedroom on the 2nd floor opposite mine. It gets the morning sun. He paused. Mrs. Abernathy is a fine woman, but set in her ways. She's been running my household since my mother died when I was 10. She might seem gruff at first, but her heart's solid gold. Rebecca nodded, mentally preparing herself for this new dynamic. Her life in Boston had been solitary since her parents' passing, working long hours in the dressmaking shop with little social interaction. As they crested a hill, Kyle pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below. Whispering Pines Ranch spread before them, a substantial 2-story house built of sturdy logs, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, vast fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A small stream wound through the property, its banks lined with the tall pines that had given the ranch its name. It's beautiful, Rebecca breathed, genuinely impressed. This was no rough frontier outpost but a well-established homestead that spoke of years of hard work and care. It's home, Kyle said simply, a hint of pride in his voice. He flicked the reins and the horses began the descent into the valley. As they approached, Rebecca could see activity around the property, a man mending a fence, another leading a horse to the stable. Both men looked up at the wagon's approach, curiosity evident even at a distance. I should warn you, Kyle said as they drew nearer. News travels fast out here. By tomorrow, everyone within 50 miles will have heard about what happened in town. There might be talk. Rebecca stiffened. What kind of talk? Some might wonder why I brought you here. Others might question your character simply because of Mitchell's actions. But I did nothing wrong, she protested. Kyle's expression was gentle but realistic. I know that. But frontier society can be unforgiving, especially toward women. Just be prepared. The wagon rolled into the yard and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She squinted at them, clearly surprised to see Kyle returning with a passenger. Mrs. Abernathy, Kyle called as he brought the wagon to a halt. We have a guest. The older woman approached, her shrewd eyes taking in Rebecca's travel-worn appearance. A guest, is it? Or something else entirely, Kyle Warrington? Kyle jumped down from the wagon and offered his hand to help Rebecca descend. This is Miss Rebecca Davis. She's going to be helping you with the house if that meets with your approval. Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Is she now? And what qualifications does Miss Davis possess for such a position? Rebecca straightened her shoulders, determined to make a good impression despite her exhaustion. I'm a skilled seamstress, madam, and I kept house for my father after my mother passed. I can cook, clean, mend, and I'm a quick learner for anything I don't already know. The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, then turned to Kyle. And how exactly did you come to hire help without consulting me first? Kyle's expression remained calm. It's a long story, Mrs. Abernathy, best told over supper. For now, Miss Davis has had a trying journey and could use some rest. Perhaps you could show her to the spare room. Mrs. Abernathy huffed but nodded. Come along then, Miss Davis. I'll not have it said that Whispering Pines lacks hospitality, however unexpected the visitor. Rebecca glanced at Kyle, who gave her an encouraging nod. Thank you, Mr. Warrington, she said formally, aware of Mrs. Abernathy's watchful gaze. For everything. "We'll talk more later," he promised, then turned to unload her valise from the wagon. Following Mrs. Abernathy into the house, Rebecca was struck by the unexpected comfort of the interior. The main room featured solid, handcrafted furniture, colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves lined with volumes, a surprising sight in a bachelor's frontier home. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, currently unlit in the summer heat. "This way, Mrs. Abernathy directed, leading her up a wooden staircase. "The spare room hasn't been used in some time, but the linens are clean." The bedroom was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. A window overlooked the yard and the mountains beyond. Kyle had been right, it would catch the morning sun beautifully. "Supper's at 6, the housekeeper informed her. "That gives you an hour to freshen up. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll bring up a hot kettle shortly." "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm grateful for your kindness." The older woman paused at the door. "I don't know what brought you here, Miss Davis, but Kyle Warrington is the finest man in this territory. Whatever arrangement exists between you, I trust it's honorable." Rebecca met her gaze steadily. "There is no arrangement, Mrs. Abernathy. Mr. Warrington offered me a position when I found myself in difficult circumstances. Nothing more." Something in her expression must have convinced the housekeeper, for her stern demeanor softened slightly. "Well then, we'll see how you manage. This is no place for city delicacy." "I'm stronger than I look," Rebecca assured her. "You'd better be," Mrs. Abernathy replied, though without malice. "Life out here demands it." Left alone, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her in waves. She had traveled west with such hope, only to be betrayed, humiliated, and then rescued in the space of an hour. Now she found herself in a stranger's home, dependent once again on someone else's charity. Yet as she looked around the simple, clean room, a surprising sense of peace settled over her. Whatever lay ahead, she had escaped a terrible fate. For that alone, she owed Kyle Warrington a debt she could never repay. Rebecca splashed water on her face, changed into her second dress, a simple brown cotton that had seen better days, and attempted to tame her auburn hair into a fresh bun. By the time she descended the stairs, the aroma of cooking filled the house, making her realize she hadn't eaten since a meager breakfast on the train. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy stirring a large pot on the cast-iron stove. "Can I help?" she offered. The housekeeper appraised her for a moment, then nodded toward a basket of vegetables. "Those need chopping for the stew." Rebecca set to work, grateful for the simple, familiar task. Through the open window, she could see Kyle at the corral, deep in conversation with an older man she assumed was Hank, the foreman. Even at this distance, Kyle's tall figure commanded attention, his movements reflecting a quiet confidence as he gestured toward the pastures beyond. "He's a good man," Mrs. Abernathy said suddenly, following Rebecca's gaze. "Works harder than any 3 men and never complains. This ranch is his life." "It's impressive what he's built here," Rebecca replied carefully. "What his father started and he finished," the housekeeper corrected. After Samuel Warrington died, Kyle could have sold up. Many urged him to, but he was determined to honor his father's dream. Rebecca continued chopping carrots, absorbing this information. "You've known him a long time." "Since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," Mrs. Abernathy confirmed. "His mother, Elizabeth, was my dearest friend. After she died birthing what would have been Kyle's sister, neither survived. I promised I'd look after her boy." "You've done a fine job," Rebecca offered sincerely. The older woman's face softened momentarily before she returned to her usual brisk manner. "Well, he's still lacking a wife, so my work isn't done. 28 years old and not even courting. Too busy with these cattle and his responsibilities." Rebecca remained silent, unsure how to respond to this pointed observation. Mrs. Abernathy continued stirring the stew. Now, I expect you'll tell me over supper exactly how you came to be riding in Kyle's wagon today. I've known that boy his whole life, and he's never once brought a woman back to the ranch. It's not what you might think, Rebecca assured her. I rarely think what others expect me to, the housekeeper replied with surprising humor. Set the table, would you? Plates are in that cupboard, silverware in the drawer beneath. By the time Kyle entered the kitchen, washing up at the pump outside before coming in, Rebecca had set the large wooden table for four. Hank joining us? Kyle asked, noticing the extra place. As he does every evening, Mrs. Abernathy confirmed. Though the others eat at the bunkhouse, no sense having all those boots tracking mud through my clean kitchen. Hank Thompson proved to be a weathered man in his 50s with a handlebar mustache and kind eyes. He tipped his hat to Rebecca as Kyle made the introductions, his manner respectful but curious. Miss Davis will be helping Mrs. Abernathy with the household, Kyle explained as they seated themselves at the table. She's come from Boston and is new to our ways. Boston, eh? Hank said, accepting a bowl of stew from Mrs. Abernathy. Long way from home. Yes, Rebecca agreed, though I'm beginning to think that was the point. Kyle, Mrs. Abernathy interrupted, I believe you owe us an explanation about Miss Davis's arrival, particularly as she claims there's no arrangement between you. Kyle set down his spoon, meeting Rebecca's eyes across the table. Would you prefer I tell it, or would you rather explain? Rebecca hesitated, then squared her shoulders. I'll tell it. It's my story, after all. Succinctly but honestly, she recounted the events at the train station, her arrangement with Mitchell, his betrayal, and Kyle's intervention. She omitted some of the more humiliating details, but made the situation clear enough. When she finished, silence hung over the table. Hank was the first to speak, his voice tight with controlled anger. That Mitchell always was a snake. Came to town 2 years ago acting like he owned the place. Never trusted him. Mrs. Abernathy reached across the table and patted Rebecca's hand. You poor dear. What a terrible welcome to Wyoming. It ended better than it might have, Rebecca said, glancing at Kyle, who had remained silent throughout her account. $200, Hank mused, shaking his head. That's a steep price for doing the right thing, boss. Not from where I'm sitting, Kyle replied quietly. Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. Well, Miss Davis, it seems you've landed on your feet despite that scoundrel's best efforts, and I won't deny an extra pair of hands would be welcome around here. I don't expect charity, Rebecca said firmly. I'll work hard to earn my keep until I've saved enough to return east. East, Mrs. Abernathy echoed, after coming all this way. I have nothing here, Rebecca explained. No family, no connections, no prospects. You have a job, Kyle pointed out, and a roof over your head. That's more than many can claim when they arrive in the West. And you have us, Mrs. Abernathy added, surprising Rebecca with the gentle declaration, for however long you choose to stay. Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat at this unexpected kindness. Thank you, she managed, all of you. The conversation shifted to ranch matters, and Rebecca was content to listen, learning about the operation that sustained Whispering Pines. It was clear that Kyle was respected by his employees, and that the relationship between him, Hank, and Mrs. Abernathy was more familial than professional. After supper, Rebecca insisted on helping with the dishes despite Mrs. Abernathy's protests. Kyle and Hank moved to the porch, where Rebecca could hear the low murmur of their voices as they discussed the next day's work. He doesn't make a habit of this, you know, Mrs. Abernathy said as they worked. Of what? Rescuing damsels, or spending small fortunes on strangers. She handed Rebecca a plate to dry. Kyle's a careful man with his money and his trust. What he did today was out of character. Rebecca considered this. Then why did he do it? The housekeeper's expression grew thoughtful. That, my dear, is what I'm wondering myself. Later, as darkness settled over the ranch, Rebecca stood at her bedroom window, watching the distant flicker of lanterns in the bunkhouse. The day's events had left her exhausted yet strangely alert, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Davis," Kyle's voice was low. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Rebecca hesitated, aware of the impropriety of receiving a man in her bedroom, but the door stood ajar, visible from the staircase. "Yes, of course." Kyle remained in the hallway, respectfully keeping the door open between them. He had removed his hat, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd run his fingers through it in thought. "I wanted to make sure you're settling in all right," he said. "Everyone has been very kind," she assured him, "especially considering the circumstances." He nodded, seeming relieved. "I've spoken with Hank about your wages. $6 a week with room and board. It's what we'd pay any housekeeper with your skills." Rebecca's eyes widened. The sum was generous, more than she'd earned as a seamstress in Boston. "That's very fair, Mr. Warrington." "Kyle," he corrected gently. "And it's not charity, Rebecca. It's a proper wage for honest work." His use of her given name felt intimate in the quiet hallway, though his tone remained respectful. Rebecca nodded, accepting both the correction and the assurance. "There's something else," Kyle continued. "I'll be riding into town tomorrow. If you have a letter you'd like to send east to let anyone know of your change in circumstances, I'd be happy to post it for you." The consideration touched her. "That's kind, but there's no one to write to. As I said, my parents are gone, and I have no siblings or close friends remaining in Boston." A shadow passed over Kyle's face. "I understand loneliness," he said simply, "but please know that while you're at Whispering Pines, you have a place where you belong, however temporary you intend it to be." The words settled around Rebecca like a warm blanket, unexpectedly comforting. "Thank you, Kyle." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Rest well, Rebecca. Tomorrow is a new beginning." As he turned to go, Rebecca called after him. "Kyle," he paused, glancing back. "When you told Mitchell I was free, did you mean it?" His expression softened. "Completely. You owe me nothing for what happened today. Your future is your own to decide." With that, he continued down the hallway to his own room, leaving Rebecca with a curious lightness in her chest, the unfamiliar sensation of true choice stretching before her like the vast Wyoming sky. The first rays of dawn filtered through Rebecca's window, painting the simple room in warm, golden light. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't recall where she was, expecting the cramped boarding house room in Boston. Then yesterday's events rushed back: the train station, Mitchell's betrayal, and Kyle Warrington's unexpected intervention. She rose quickly, eager to prove her worth on her first full day at Whispering Pines. The dress she'd worn yesterday was wrinkled from travel, so she donned her third and final garment, a practical gray work dress with a white collar. Her wardrobe was pitifully limited, she realized, thinking ruefully of the beautiful wedding dress packed away. Perhaps she could use her seamstress skills to repurpose it into something more practical. When Rebecca entered the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy already at work, kneading dough for the day's bread. The older woman looked up with approval at Rebecca's prompt appearance. "Good, you're an early riser. Can't abide sluggards in this house." "I've been rising with the sun since childhood," Rebecca assured her, rolling up her sleeves. "What can I help with first?" Mrs. Abernathy pointed to a basket of eggs. "The men will be in from morning chores soon, hungry as bears." "Scramble those, and then there's bacon to fry." Rebecca set to work, grateful for the familiar tasks that required no instruction. Through the window, she could see activity in the yard: ranch hands leading horses from the stable, Kyle and Hank examining something on a map spread across a barrel. By the time breakfast was ready, Rebecca had learned the rhythm of the kitchen, anticipating Mrs. Abernathy's needs and earning a grudging nod of approval. When Kyle entered, he paused momentarily, seeming surprised to see Rebecca so comfortably established at the stove. "Good morning," he greeted them both, washing his hands at the pump sink. "Something smells delicious." "Miss Davis handles a skillet well enough," Mrs. Abernathy acknowledged, the closest thing to a compliment Rebecca had yet received. Breakfast was a quick, efficient affair. The ranch hands Joe, Miguel, and Charlie ate at a separate table in the kitchen, casting curious glances at Rebecca but maintaining a respectful distance. Kyle explained the day's tasks, and Rebecca marveled at the complexity of running such an operation. "I'll be heading into town after we move the herd to the north pasture," Kyle informed them. "Anything you need, Mrs. Abernathy." The housekeeper rattled off a list of supplies, which Kyle noted carefully. "And you, Rebecca, is there anything you require?" Rebecca hesitated, reluctant to ask for anything when she'd already received so much. "Perhaps some fabric if it's not too much trouble. I could make myself another work dress." Kyle studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Make a list of whatever you need. Consider it an advance on your wages." After breakfast, while the men departed for their tasks, Rebecca fell into the household routine. She and Mrs. Abernathy tackled the laundry first, hauling water from the pump to fill large copper tubs. It was hard, physical work that left Rebecca's hands red and aching, but she welcomed the distraction. "You're not afraid of work, I'll give you that," Mrs. Abernathy remarked as they hung sheets on the line to dry in the summer breeze. "I've never had the luxury of idleness," Rebecca replied, securing a clothespin. "Neither have any of us out here." The housekeeper squinted toward the distant pasture where men on horseback guided cattle through a gate. "Kyle was up before dawn, same as every day. That man carries the weight of this entire ranch on his shoulders. He seems capable of bearing it," Rebecca observed, watching the distant figure of Kyle directing operations with calm authority. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a shrewd look. "Capable, yes, but no man should bear such burdens alone." Rebecca chose not to respond to the obvious hint. Instead, she changed the subject. "Tell me about Willow Creek. What kind of town is it?" "Small but growing," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Got a general store, post office, church, school, and more saloons than a town this size needs. Decent folk trying to build something alongside the usual frontier riffraff." "And Mitchell, was he respected before?" "Yesterday." The housekeeper's expression hardened. "He put on airs, that one. Opened a mercantile when he arrived, but word is he was always in debt. Never trusted him myself. Too slick by half." They moved on to dusting the main room, where Rebecca marveled at the number of books lining the shelves. "Does Mr. Warrington read all of these?" she asked, running a finger along the spines: Shakespeare, Dickens, historical accounts, scientific journals. "Everyone, Mrs. Abernathy confirmed with evident pride. His mother was a schoolteacher before she married. Made sure Kyle had an education, even out here. He reads every night before bed." The detail painted a different picture of the quiet cowboy than Rebecca might have imagined. "He's more than he seems," she murmured. "Most worth knowing are," the housekeeper replied. By midday, Rebecca's muscles ached from unaccustomed labor, but she felt a deep satisfaction in the work accomplished. She was chopping vegetables for the evening meal when the sound of hoofbeats announced Kyle's return from town. He entered the kitchen looking trail-worn but satisfied, setting a large package on the table. "Your supplies, Mrs. Abernathy," he announced, then turned to Rebecca. "And for you, Miss Davis." The bundle he placed before her contained not just the simple cotton fabric she'd requested, but several yards of finer materials in practical but attractive colors, along with thread, buttons, and even a pair of sturdy new boots that looked to be her size. "This is too much," Rebecca protested, touching the goods with disbelieving fingers. Kyle shrugged off her concern. The general store had a limited selection. I did my best to guess what might be useful. How did you know my shoe size? A hint of color touched his cheekbones. I noticed your footprints in the dust yesterday. Seemed about right for these. The thoughtfulness of the gesture left Rebecca momentarily speechless. Thank you, she managed finally. I'll repay you for my wages. Kyle waved off her offer. Consider it a welcome gift. He paused, then added more seriously. There's something else you should know. Word of yesterday's events has indeed spread. I encountered some speculation in town. Rebecca's stomach tightened. What kind of speculation? The usual frontier gossip. Some think you're my. Well, that our arrangement isn't as innocent as it is. And what did you tell them? She asked, holding his gaze steadily. The truth. That you're employed as a housekeeper and nothing more. He hesitated. But people believe what they want to believe. I'm sorry if this complicates things for you. Rebecca sighed, having expected as much. Gossip isn't unique to the frontier, Mr. Warrington. I'll manage. I've no doubt of that, he replied with unexpected warmth. Oh, and this came for the ranch. He handed over a thick envelope. Cattle buyer from Chicago. Looks like they want to increase their order for the fall drive. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been quietly observing their exchange, reached for the letter. I'll put it with the accounts for you to review tonight. But Kyle shook his head. Actually, I was hoping Rebecca might help with that. If she's willing. Both women stared at him in surprise. Me? Rebecca asked. Kyle nodded. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you're educated. I could use someone with a fresh eye for the books. Ranch accounts can get complicated, and with the expansion we're planning. I'm not sure I'm qualified. You can read, write, and cipher, can't you? He interrupted. Well, yes, of course. Then you're qualified. Unless you'd rather not. Rebecca considered the offer. It was unexpected but represented a vote of confidence she hadn't anticipated. I'd be happy to help, she decided. Good, Kyle said, seeming genuinely pleased. We'll look at them after supper. As he left to return to his afternoon duties, Mrs. Abernathy watched him go with a speculative expression. Interesting, she murmured. What is? Rebecca asked, returning to her vegetable chopping. In 15 years, Kyle has never asked anyone to look at those accounts besides me or Hank. The housekeeper's eyes twinkled. He must think highly of you already. Rebecca dismissed the observation, but a warm sensation settled in her chest nonetheless. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt not just safe but valued, a feeling she'd nearly forgotten. That evening, after the dishes were cleared, Kyle spread the ranch accounts across the dining table. Rebecca sat beside him, close enough to share the ledger but maintaining a proper distance. The lamp cast a golden glow over the pages as Kyle explained the system his father had devised. It's straightforward enough, he said, but with the new Chicago contract and the breeding program we're developing, the numbers have grown more complex. Rebecca leaned forward, quickly grasping the organization. You've kept meticulous records, she observed, running a finger along columns of neat figures. My father insisted on it. Said a man who doesn't know where every penny goes is a man who'll lose them all. A wise philosophy, Rebecca agreed. She studied the latest correspondence, then made a few calculations on a separate sheet. If I understand correctly, this new order represents a 30% increase over last year's contract. Kyle nodded, watching her work with evident approval. That's right. It's a significant opportunity, but it means expanding our operation faster than planned. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Rebecca asking questions and offering observations that Kyle considered thoughtfully. She found herself enjoying the mental challenge after a day of physical labor, and Kyle proved to be a patient explainer, never condescending despite her unfamiliarity with ranch operations. You have a good head for business, he remarked as they finished reviewing the final page. Rebecca smiled, pleased by the compliment. My father was a bookkeeper before illness forced him to retire. He taught me his methods. He taught you well. Kyle closed the ledger, his hand briefly brushing hers as he reached for the pen they'd been sharing. The accidental contact sent an unexpected warmth up Rebecca's arm, and she withdrew her hand quickly. Kyle seemed to notice her reaction, but made no comment. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with a thoughtful expression. You mentioned returning east eventually. What would you do there? Rebecca sighed, considering the question. Continue as a seamstress, I suppose. It's the only skill I have that pays a living wage for a woman alone. Did you enjoy it? The sewing? I enjoyed the creation part, designing, bringing something beautiful into being from mere cloth and thread, she admitted. But the conditions were poor, the hours long, and the pay barely enough to survive. Kyle's gaze remained on her face, genuinely interested. And if you could choose any life, what would it be? The question caught Rebecca off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I'm not sure, she said slowly. Something with purpose, I think, where I could build something lasting. She gave a self-deprecating laugh. But those aren't the sorts of dreams practical for a woman in my position. Perhaps not in Boston, Kyle said quietly, but the West has different rules, different possibilities. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The moment was broken by Mrs. Abernathy entering with a pot of coffee. Thought you might need this if you're going to be burning the midnight oil, she announced, setting down mugs for both of them. We've just finished, actually, Kyle said, standing. And I should check on that mare about to foal before turning in. Thank you for your help, Rebecca. It was my pleasure, she replied, meaning it. After Kyle left, Mrs. Abernathy settled into his vacated chair with a knowing look. Well what? Rebecca asked, gathering the papers. Did you impress him with your accounting skills? Rebecca rolled her eyes at the housekeeper's transparent matchmaking. We simply reviewed the books, Mrs. Abernathy. Nothing more. MMHMM, the older woman hummed skeptically. And I suppose the way he looked at you while you were bent over those figures was purely professional. Heat rose in Rebecca's cheeks. You're imagining things. I've known that boy since he was in short pants. I know when something's caught his interest. Mrs. Abernathy patted Rebecca's hand. Just keep your heart open, dear. That's all I'm saying. My heart has nothing to do with my position here, Rebecca insisted, though a treacherous flutter in her chest suggested otherwise. I'm here to work, save money, and then decide my future. Nothing more. If you say so, Mrs. Abernathy replied with infuriating confidence. But the West has a way of changing people's plans. That night, as Rebecca prepared for bed, she found herself standing at her window again, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. In the distance, a lone figure moved between the barn and the main house. Kyle, returning from checking on his pregnant mare. She watched him walk with that easy, confident stride, and despite her protestations to Mrs. Abernathy, she couldn't deny a growing awareness of him not just as her employer or rescuer, but as a man. A good man, from everything she'd seen, intelligent, hardworking, honorable, but she'd been fooled by letters before, and her future remained uncertain. With a sigh, Rebecca turned from the window and climbed into bed, determinedly pushing aside thoughts of Kyle Warrington's thoughtful blue eyes and the warmth of his hand brushing against hers. Days at Whispering Pines fell into a comfortable rhythm as summer advanced across the Wyoming landscape. Rebecca's hands grew calloused from work, her skin tanned from hours in the garden, and her confidence blossomed with each new skill mastered. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a demanding but fair teacher, and Rebecca absorbed the older woman's frontier knowledge eagerly. Each evening, Rebecca helped Kyle with the ranch accounts, their partnership at the table evolving into a comfortable routine. He valued her insights, and she found herself increasingly invested in the ranch's success. What had begun as a temporary arrangement started to feel like something more permanent, though Rebecca rarely allowed herself to acknowledge this shift. 2 weeks after her arrival, a neighbor's visit brought the outside world crashing back into their peaceful existence. Martha Wilson, wife of a nearby rancher, rode over ostensibly to borrow sugar, but her curious gaze fixed on Rebecca immediately. "So you're the Boston girl we've heard about," she said bluntly after introductions were made in the kitchen. "Quite a story making the rounds about how you came to be here." Rebecca stiffened but maintained her composure. "I'm sure the truth has been embellished in the telling." "They say Kyle Warrington paid $200 to save you from a fate worse than death," Martha continued, watching Rebecca closely. "That's a princely sum for a mere housekeeper." Mrs. Abernathy slammed a pan onto the stove with unnecessary force. "Martha Wilson, if you've come to gossip, you can take your empty sugar bowl and head right back home." The visitor had the grace to look abashed. "I meant no offense. It's just unusual is all. Kyle's always kept to himself, and suddenly there's a pretty Eastern girl living under his roof." "Working under his roof," Rebecca corrected firmly. "Mr. Warrington is my employer, nothing more." Martha's expression suggested skepticism, but she changed the subject. "Well, regardless, you must join us for the Founders' Day celebration in town next weekend. The whole territory turns out for it, dancing, food, games for the children. It would be a proper welcome to the community." The invitation, despite its bearer's earlier implications, appealed to Rebecca. She'd been at the ranch for weeks without venturing back to Willow Creek. "That's kind of you, but I'm not sure we'll be there," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted, surprising Rebecca. "The whole ranch goes every year. Tradition." After Martha departed, Rebecca questioned the housekeeper. "Are you sure it's wise for me to attend, given the gossip?" Mrs. Abernathy snorted. "Hiding away will only feed it. Besides, it's time folks saw you for who you are, not what Mitchell tried to make of you." Rebecca wasn't convinced, but when Kyle mentioned the celebration that evening, his enthusiasm was unexpected. "It's the highlight of the summer," he told her as they reviewed the weekly expenditures. "The entire territory comes together. There's music, dancing, contests. Mrs. Wilson invited me, but I'm concerned about being a source of gossip." Kyle set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Rebecca, you've done nothing wrong. You have every right to hold your head high in this community." "But what about your reputation?" she asked. "Having me living here has already caused talk." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Let them talk. I know the truth, and so do you." The intensity in his voice surprised her. "You've been so kind, Kyle. I don't want to bring you any trouble." His expression softened. "You're not trouble, Rebecca. Far from it." Something in his gaze made her heart quicken, and she looked down at the account book to hide her reaction. "Then I'd be happy to attend," she murmured. The day before the celebration brought an unexpected flurry of activity. Mrs. Abernathy produced a dust-covered trunk from the attic, revealing treasures from the past. "These were Elizabeth Warrington's," she explained, lifting out several carefully preserved dresses. "Kyle's mother was about your size. She'd want them worn rather than rotting away up there." Rebecca gasped at the beautiful garments, well made, if somewhat outdated. "I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," the housekeeper interrupted. "Consider it borrowing if that eases your conscience." Among the dresses was a lovely emerald green creation with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Rebecca held it against herself, admiring the craftsmanship. "That was her favorite," came Kyle's voice from the doorway. He stood watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. Rebecca quickly lowered the dress. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume, no," he said quickly. "Please. My mother would be pleased to see her things being used again, especially by someone who appreciates their quality." There was something in his tone, a warmth, a hint of something deeper that made Rebecca's cheeks flush. Are you certain? Kyle nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. I am. That evening, Rebecca worked by lamplight, adjusting the emerald dress to fit her frame perfectly. As her needle moved through the fine fabric, she found herself wondering about Elizabeth Warrington, the schoolteacher who had come west for love, raised a son in this wilderness, and left behind these beautiful reminders of her existence. What would Elizabeth think of her son now, this good, steady man who had grown into his responsibilities with such quiet strength? Would she approve of the woman wearing her dress, a woman with no claim to permanence in her son's life? These thoughts troubled Rebecca as she made the final stitches, but she pushed them aside. Tomorrow was just a community celebration, nothing more. Yet as she hung the finished dress on her door, she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach, anticipation that had little to do with the event itself, and everything to do with the man whose mother's dress she would wear. Founders Day dawned clear and bright, the late July sun promising heat by midday. The entire ranch bustled with preparation, boots being polished, horses groomed, the wagon readied for the journey into town. Rebecca took extra care with her appearance, styling her auburn hair in a more flattering arrangement than her usual practical bun. The emerald dress fit perfectly after her alterations, the color bringing out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. When she descended the stairs, Mrs. Abernathy gave an approving nod. "You'll do," the housekeeper pronounced, which from her was high praise indeed. Outside, Kyle was helping Hank secure the team to the wagon. He turned at Rebecca's approach, and the expression that crossed his face made her breath catch surprise, followed by something warmer, more intense. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. The dress needed only minor adjustments. Kyle offered his hand to help her into the wagon. "It suits you," he said quietly. "Green was always my mother's color, but I think she might agree it's yours now." The journey to Willow Creek was filled with anticipation, the ranch hands riding alongside the wagon, occasionally breaking into song. Rebecca found herself relaxing, caught up in the festive atmosphere. As they approached town, she felt a momentary trepidation at the sight of the train station where her Wyoming journey had begun so inauspiciously. Kyle, seated beside her on the wagon bench, seemed to sense her discomfort. "New memories today," he said softly, for her ears alone. Rebecca nodded gratefully, drawing strength from his steady presence. Willow Creek had transformed for the celebration. The main street was decorated with bunting and flags. Stalls lined the boardwalk selling food and trinkets, and a wooden platform had been erected at the center of town for dancing. Families from surrounding ranches and farms mingled with townspeople, creating a festive atmosphere that belied the usual frontier hardships. As they secured the wagon, Rebecca noticed curious glances and whispers following their group. Kyle stayed close to her side, a protective presence that both comforted and confused her. Their relationship remained strictly proper, yet there was an undeniable current between them that seemed to have grown stronger with each passing day. "Kyle Warrington." A booming voice cut through the crowd, and a portly man in a fine suit approached, hand extended. "And this must be the young lady we've heard about." "Mayor Simmons," Kyle greeted him, shaking hands. "This is Miss Rebecca Davis. Rebecca, Mayor Thomas Simmons." "A pleasure to finally meet you, Miss Davis," the mayor said, tipping his hat. "We're glad to have new faces in our growing community." "Thank you, sir," Rebecca replied, relieved by the courteous welcome. "Kyle," the mayor continued, "the committee was hoping you'd judge the horsemanship contest again this year. No one has a better eye for riding skill in the territory." Kyle glanced at Rebecca. "I'd be honored, but I was planning to show Miss Davis around the celebrations." "I'll be fine," she assured him, touched by his consideration. "Mrs. Abernathy will keep me company, and I'd hate to disrupt tradition." After a moment's hesitation, Kyle agreed. I won't be long, he promised. As Kyle departed with the mayor, Mrs. Abernathy appeared at Rebecca's side. Come along, dear. Let's sample some of Mrs. Peterson's apple pie before the crowds descend on her stall. The next few hours passed in a pleasant blur of introductions, conversations, and small-town entertainments. Rebecca found herself welcomed by most, though she was acutely aware of speculative glances and whispered comments. She held her head high, refusing to be diminished by gossip. She was examining a display of handcrafted jewelry when a familiar voice froze her in place. Well, if it isn't Boston's finest, looking mighty comfortable in her new situation. Rebecca turned slowly to face Harold Mitchell, the man who had nearly sold her to a saloon owner. He looked thinner than she remembered, his eyes bloodshot, his once neat appearance now shabby. Mr. Mitchell, she acknowledged coldly, searching for Mrs. Abernathy in the crowd. The housekeeper had wandered to a nearby stall. Mitchell moved closer, his breath sour with whiskey. Quite clever of you, wasn't it? Trading up from a failing merchant to the territory's most eligible bachelor. Rebecca stepped back, maintaining distance between them. I work for Mr. Warrington as his housekeeper, nothing more. A disbelieving sneer crossed Mitchell's face. Is that what you call it? The whole territory knows he paid good money for you. He paid to free me from the illegal sale you attempted, Rebecca corrected, her voice steady despite her racing heart. A crime, I believe, under territorial law. Mitchell's expression darkened. You ungrateful, is there a problem here? Kyle's voice cut through the tension as he materialized at Rebecca's side, his normally genial expression replaced by something harder. Mitchell's demeanor changed instantly, false joviality replacing his sneer. No problem at all, Warrington. Just greeting my former fiancée. Former being the operative word, Kyle replied coldly. Miss Davis is under my protection now, Mitchell. I suggest you remember that. Something unspoken passed between the men, a clear warning in Kyle's stance, a flicker of fear in Mitchell's bloodshot eyes. No harm meant, Mitchell muttered, backing away. Enjoy the celebration. As he slunk off into the crowd, Rebecca released a shaky breath. Thank you. Kyle's expression remained grim. Did he threaten you? No, just insinuations about our arrangement. I'm sorry, Kyle said, his anger giving way to concern. Perhaps coming today was a mistake. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. No, I won't let him or anyone else make me feel unwelcome. This is your community, and if I'm to stay here, even temporarily, I need to be part of it. A slow smile replaced Kyle's frown. You're a remarkable woman, Rebecca Davis. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Before she could respond, the sound of fiddles tuning up drew their attention to the central platform. The dancing starting, Kyle observed. Would you care to join in? Rebecca hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that very much. Kyle led her to the wooden dance floor, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. As they took their positions for a lively reel, Rebecca noticed envious glances from several young women in the crowd. Apparently, Kyle Warrington rarely participated in such festivities. The music began, and Rebecca surrendered to the joy of movement, the rhythm of the fiddles, and the solid presence of her partner. Kyle proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent his days on horseback, guiding her through the steps with confident ease. You dance well, she remarked during a momentary pause in the pattern. My mother insisted I learn, he replied, a reminiscent smile touching his lips. Said no son of hers would stomp around like a bull in a china shop, even in Wyoming. The image made Rebecca laugh, a genuine sound of delight that seemed to please Kyle immensely. They danced 3 more sets before stepping aside to cool off, Kyle fetching them cups of punch from a nearby table. As they stood catching their breath, Rebecca noticed Martha Wilson watching them with undisguised interest. I believe your neighbor is calculating wedding dates, Rebecca murmured, nodding discreetly in Martha's direction. Kyle followed her gaze and chuckled. Martha's been trying to marry me off since my 21st birthday. First to her niece, then to the schoolteacher, now apparently to you. And why haven't you obliged her? Rebecca asked lightly, though her heart beat a little faster awaiting his answer. Surely the most eligible bachelor in the territory has had opportunities. Something shifted in Kyle's expression, a seriousness replacing his earlier amusement. I was engaged once, 4 years ago. Ellen Bradshaw, daughter of a rancher from the next county. What happened? Rebecca asked softly, sensing the pain beneath his casual tone. Winter influenza took her 3 months before our wedding. He looked away, his gaze distant. After that, I focused on the ranch. It seemed simpler. Rebecca's heart ached for him. I'm sorry, Kyle, truly. He turned back to her, a sad smile touching his lips. It was a long time ago, but it made me cautious about letting anyone else close. The admission hung between them, fraught with unspoken implications. Before Rebecca could respond, the mayor's voice boomed from the platform, announcing the start of the shooting contest. You should enter, Rebecca said, recognizing Kyle's need to change the subject. I've seen your skill with a rifle. The shadow lifted from his expression, replaced by a competitive gleam. Only if you'll be my good luck charm. The request was playful, but something in his eyes made it feel significant. I'd be honored, Rebecca replied. The shooting contest drew a large crowd, with competitors from throughout the territory. Kyle performed admirably, his steady hand and keen eye earning him second place behind only the town's sheriff. Rebecca found herself cheering enthusiastically, caught up in the community spirit. As the day progressed into evening, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the continuing festivities. A slower, more melodious tune began, and couples moved to the dance floor for a waltz. Kyle appeared at Rebecca's side, his hand extended in invitation. One more dance before we head home. The word home sent an unexpected pang through Rebecca's chest. When had she begun thinking of Whispering Pines as home, she placed her hand in Kyle's, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. This dance was different, closer, more intimate. His hand at her waist guided her gently, and she was acutely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him. Thank you for convincing me to come today, she said as they moved together in perfect synchrony. Thank you for braving it, he replied. It can't have been easy, facing the town again after what happened. It was different with you beside me, she admitted, then flushed at how the words sounded. Kyle's eyes darkened slightly, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before returning to meet her eyes. Rebecca, well, isn't this cozy? A slurred voice interrupted. Harold Mitchell stood swaying at the edge of the dance floor, considerably more intoxicated than earlier. The mail-order bride and her rescuer, playing house for the whole town to see. Dancers near them faltered, heads turning toward the disruption. Kyle's arm tightened protectively around Rebecca's waist. You're drunk, Mitchell, Kyle said evenly. Go home before you embarrass yourself further. Mitchell laughed bitterly. Embarrass myself. That's rich, coming from the man who paid $200 for damaged goods. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Rebecca felt as though she'd been slapped, humiliation burning through her. Kyle released her gently, stepping toward Mitchell with controlled fury. Apologize to the lady. Now, or what? Mitchell sneered. You'll shoot me like you threatened to shoot anyone who looks sideways at your purchased woman. That's enough. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, hand on his pistol. Mitchell, you're causing a public disturbance. Either leave peacefully or spend the night in my jail. For a tense moment, it seemed Mitchell might resist, but self-preservation won out. He spat on the ground near Kyle's boots, then turned and staggered away. The music had stopped, and Rebecca stood frozen, acutely aware of every eye upon her. The celebration's joy had evaporated, replaced by uncomfortable silence and pitying glances. "Rebecca," Kyle began, reaching for her. "I'd like to go home now," she said quietly, the shame of the public scene overwhelming her. The ride back to Whispering Pines was subdued, the earlier festive atmosphere replaced by tension. Mrs. Abernathy attempted conversation, but Rebecca responded with monosyllables, lost in her thoughts. Kyle drove silently, occasionally glancing at her with concern. When they arrived at the ranch, Rebecca immediately excused herself, retreating to her room despite the early hour. She removed Elizabeth's beautiful dress carefully, hanging it in the wardrobe before changing into her nightgown. Sitting at the small vanity, she unpinned her hair, watching it fall around her shoulders in the mirror's reflection. A soft knock at the door roused her from her melancholy. "Rebecca," Kyle's voice was tentative. "May I speak with you?" She considered refusing but found she couldn't. "Just a moment," she called, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders before opening the door. Kyle stood in the hallway, still in his celebration clothes but with his tie loosened and collar unbuttoned. His expression was troubled, his usual composure replaced by evident distress. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said without preamble. "Mitchell was drunk and bitter, and you didn't deserve to be humiliated like that." Rebecca shook her head. "It's not your fault, Kyle, and perhaps there was truth in his accusations, however crudely expressed." Kyle's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You did pay for me," she said softly. "Whatever your intentions, that's how people see it, how they see me." Mitchell's mail-order bride bought by Kyle Warrington at the train station. "That's not, it is," she interrupted. "And perhaps it's time I faced reality. I can't build a life here with that shadow hanging over me." Kyle stepped closer, his voice urgent. "Rebecca, no one who matters believes that nonsense. You've earned respect on your own merits these past weeks." "Have I?" she challenged. "Or has your protection simply kept people's true opinions at bay? What are you saying?" There was a note of fear in his voice now. Rebecca took a deep breath. "I'm saying perhaps it's time I continued on as I always intended. Find somewhere new where I can start fresh without this." Complication. Kyle's expression shifted, pain replacing concern. "Is that truly what you want, to leave Whispering Pines, to leave?" He hesitated, then finished simply. "Us." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Rebecca's heart constricted painfully. "There is no us, Kyle," she said gently. "There can't be, not with how things began between us. People will always wonder, always whisper." "I don't care what people think," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I care what you think, what you feel." "What I feel is gratitude," Rebecca replied, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a half-truth at best. Kyle studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. Whatever he saw must have disappointed him, for he stepped back, his shoulders straightening. "I understand," he said formally. "If you wish to leave, I won't stop you. I'll arrange for transportation to wherever you'd like to go and ensure you have funds to establish yourself." The offer was generous, exactly what she should want. Yet it felt like a defeat, a severing of something precious before it had fully formed. "Thank you," she managed. Kyle nodded once, then turned to go. At the top of the stairs, he paused without looking back. "For what it's worth, Rebecca, I never once thought of you as something I purchased. From the moment I saw you at that station, I saw only a woman of extraordinary courage and dignity." Before she could respond, he continued down the stairs, his footsteps fading into the quiet house. Rebecca closed her door and leaned against it, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had come west seeking security and found instead a complicated tangle of emotions she hadn't anticipated. Kyle Warrington had saved her from a terrible fate, given her work, respect, and a place to belong. And somewhere along the way, without intending to, she had given him her heart. But how could anything built on such a foundation ever be truly equal? How could she ever know if his feelings, whatever they might be, were genuine or born of responsibility for the woman he had rescued? These questions plagued her as she climbed into bed, certain that leaving was the only honorable choice, yet equally certain that doing so would break something inside her that might never fully heal. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Rebecca's mood perfectly. She dressed carefully in one of the work dresses she had made from the fabric Kyle provided, pinned her hair in its usual practical style, and descended to the kitchen, determined to maintain normalcy despite her inner turmoil. Mrs. Abernathy was already at work, kneading dough with more force than necessary. She looked up as Rebecca entered, her shrewd eyes taking in Rebecca's reddened ones. "So," the housekeeper said without preamble, "Kyle tells me you're planning to leave us." Rebecca nodded, reaching for an apron. "I think it's for the best." Mrs. Abernathy snorted inelegantly. "Best for whom, exactly? Not for Kyle, certainly. And I'd wager not for you either, judging by those swollen eyes." "It's complicated," Rebecca sighed, cracking eggs into a bowl with more concentration than the task required. "Only because you're making it so." The housekeeper shaped her dough into loaves with practiced movements. "That fool Mitchell made a scene, said some ugly things, and now you're running away. Is that about the size of it?" Put so bluntly, Rebecca's decision did seem reactive. "It's not just Mitchell, it's the situation itself, how Kyle and I met." "You mean how he saved you from being sold like cattle?" Mrs. Abernathy's directness was bracing. "Seems to me that's something to be grateful for, not ashamed of." "I am grateful," Rebecca protested. "More than I can express. But don't you see? That gratitude complicates everything. How can I ever be sure of my own feelings or his with that between us?" The housekeeper slid her bread pans into the oven, then turned to face Rebecca fully, flour dusting her apron. "Let me tell you something about Kyle Warrington. That boy has carried responsibility since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Lost his mama young, helped his pa build this ranch, then lost him too. Never complained, never shirked a duty." Rebecca nodded, familiar with this history. "But in all that time," Mrs. Abernathy continued, "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even Ellen, God rest her soul. She was a sweet girl and he was fond of her, but what he feels for you—" The housekeeper shook her head. "That's something different altogether." Rebecca's heart quickened at these words, but doubt still clouded her thoughts. "Even if that's true, how could it ever work? The whole territory knows how we met." "So," Mrs. Abernathy challenged, "people will talk regardless of what you do. The question is whether you'll let their gossip destroy your chance at happiness." Before Rebecca could respond, the kitchen door opened and Kyle entered, his expression guarded when he saw her. He had clearly been up for hours, his clothes already showing signs of the morning's work. "Good morning," he said formally. "I've spoken with Jim Carter. He's driving the supply wagon to Cheyenne on Thursday. If you still wish to leave, he's willing to take you." The finality of the arrangements hit Rebecca like a physical blow. 3 days. In 3 days, she would leave Whispering Pines, likely never to return. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very considerate." Kyle nodded stiffly, the warmth that usually characterized their interactions notably absent. "I'll be in the north pasture today with Hank checking fences. We may be late for supper." With that, he left, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Mrs. Abernathy sighed heavily. "That boy is hurting something fierce," she observed, "and too proud to show it." Rebecca stared at the door, her resolve wavering. "I don't want to hurt him," she whispered. "That's the last thing I want." "Then don't leave," the housekeeper said simply. But it couldn't be that simple, could it? Rebecca moved through her morning chores mechanically, her mind churning with indecision. By mid-morning, the confines of the house felt stifling. She needed space to think, to sort through the tangle of her emotions. "I'm going for a walk," she told Mrs. Abernathy, "just to clear my head." The housekeeper nodded knowingly. "The stream's peaceful this time of day." Good place for thinking. Rebecca followed the suggestion, making her way to the creek that ran through Whispering Pines property. The water burbled merrily over rocks, creating a soothing backdrop for her troubled thoughts. She found a sun-warmed boulder and sat, watching the play of light on the flowing water. What did she truly want? The question seemed simple yet proved maddeningly complex. She had come west seeking security, a home, perhaps even love eventually. Against all odds, she had found all three at Whispering Pines, not in the way she'd expected, but perhaps in a better, truer form than she could have imagined. Kyle Warrington was everything a woman could want in a husband: honorable, hardworking, intelligent, and kind. His quiet strength had become her anchor in this new world. And beyond his admirable qualities, there was something else, a connection between them that had grown naturally and steadily over the weeks of working side by side. But could she trust that connection? Would the shadow of their unusual beginning always hang over them? Would she always wonder if his feelings stemmed from obligation rather than genuine affection? These questions circled in her mind as the morning stretched toward noon. So absorbed was she in her thoughts that she didn't notice the approaching rider until he was almost upon her. Well, if it isn't the high and mighty Miss Davis, all alone for once. Rebecca's head snapped up to find Harold Mitchell dismounting a few yards away, his expression unpleasant. He looked even worse than he had at the celebration, unshaven, disheveled, with a dangerous glint in his bloodshot eyes. She stood quickly, alarm coursing through her. "Mr. Mitchell, you're trespassing on Whispering Pines property." "Am I? How interesting." He took a step closer, and Rebecca caught the scent of whiskey. "Seems to me you're the trespasser here, a proper Boston lady playing at being a frontier woman." Rebecca glanced toward the house, but it was hidden by a stand of trees. She was too far away for anyone to hear if she called out. "What do you want?" she asked, striving to keep her voice steady. Mitchell's smile was unpleasant. "Just a conversation with my former fiancé." "Is that so much to ask? We have nothing to discuss," Rebecca replied, edging sideways, planning her escape route. "Please leave before there's trouble." "Trouble?" Mitchell laughed harshly. "Sweetheart, trouble found me the moment you stepped off that train. Do you know what happened after Warrington's little display of chivalry? My creditors came calling, all of them. I lost my store, my home, everything." "I'm sorry for your misfortunes," Rebecca said carefully, "but they're not my responsibility." "Aren't they?" Mitchell moved faster than she anticipated, grabbing her wrist in a painful grip. "I paid good money to bring you west, money I didn't have to spare. And then you turned your nose up at me, let Warrington humiliate me in front of the whole town." Rebecca struggled against his hold. "Let go of me." "Not until you understand what you've cost me," Mitchell snarled, yanking her closer. "Everything I worked for gone because of you." "That's not true," Rebecca countered, fighting her rising panic. "Your own actions caused your downfall, not mine." His grip tightened painfully. "You ungrateful, I believe the lady asked you to let go." The voice was cold, controlled, and unmistakably Kyle's. He stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle in hand, his expression more dangerous than Rebecca had ever seen it. Mitchell froze but didn't release her. "This is between me and my fiancé, Warrington." "She is not your fiancé," Kyle replied evenly. "She never was. Release her. Now." For a tense moment, Rebecca thought Mitchell might refuse. Then, with a final painful squeeze, he let go of her wrist. She immediately backed away, putting distance between them. Kyle kept his rifle trained on Mitchell, his aim steady. "You have exactly 1 minute to get back on your horse and ride off my land. If I ever see you near Miss Davis again, you'll answer to me. And I promise you won't enjoy the conversation." "You think you're so much better than me," Mitchell spat. "But we both know what she is, damaged goods that no one else wanted." Kyle's finger tightened on the trigger. 50 seconds. Something in his tone must have convinced Mitchell of his seriousness, for he retreated to his horse, mounting clumsily. "This isn't over," he called as he spurred the animal into motion. "Yes," Kyle replied with deadly certainty. "It is." They watched until Mitchell disappeared from view, then Kyle lowered his rifle and turned to Rebecca, concern replacing anger in his expression. "Are you hurt?" She rubbed her wrist, which was already beginning to bruise. "Nothing serious." Kyle closed the distance between them, gently taking her hand to examine the marks on her skin. His touch was tender, in stark contrast to Mitchell's bruising grip. "I should have shot him," he said quietly. "I'm glad you didn't," Rebecca replied. "He's not worth the trouble it would bring you." Kyle's eyes met hers, filled with an emotion so raw it took her breath away. "You are." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning. Rebecca's carefully constructed arguments about leaving suddenly seemed hollow in the face of this man's unwavering devotion. "Kyle," she began, unsure what she wanted to say, but knowing she needed to say something. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night." "Rebecca, wait," he interrupted, still holding her hand. "Before you say anything else, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said weeks ago." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" Kyle took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "When I saw you at that train station, standing your ground against Mitchell and Jenkins despite your fear, I admired your courage. When I paid that money, it wasn't charity or pity, it was because I couldn't bear to see someone with your spirit broken by men like that." Rebecca listened, transfixed by the intensity in his voice. "But what started as admiration has become something else entirely," he continued. "These weeks with you at Whispering Pines working together, talking over the accounts in the evenings, seeing you bloom despite everything you've been through, I've come to care for you in a way I never expected. In a way I haven't felt for anyone before." He hesitated, then added softly, "I understand if you still want to leave. I'll respect your decision. But I needed you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with how we met and everything to do with who you are." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as the truth of her own feelings crystallized with sudden clarity. All her doubts and fears seemed insignificant compared to the certainty she felt looking into Kyle's earnest blue eyes. "I don't want to leave," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been telling myself I should go, that it was the sensible choice, but the thought of never seeing you again." She shook her head, unable to complete the sentence. Hope dawned in Kyle's expression. "What are you saying, Rebecca?" She took a step closer to him, her free hand reaching up to touch his cheek. "I'm saying that I care for you too, Kyle Warrington. More than I should, perhaps. More than is wise. But I can't deny it any longer, not even to myself." Kyle's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then brilliant. "Then stay," he said simply. "Not as my housekeeper, not as someone passing through, but as whatever you want to be, however you want to define what's between us." Rebecca laughed softly, joy bubbling up within her. "That's quite an open-ended offer, Mr. Warrington." "I'm hoping for a specific outcome eventually," he admitted, his eyes twinkling, "but I'm willing to be patient." She studied his face, this good man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Perhaps patience isn't necessary," she murmured. Understanding dawned in his expression. "Rebecca, are you suggesting that I might be amenable to a more permanent arrangement?" she finished for him. "Yes, I believe I am." Kyle's free hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent. "I don't have a ring yet," he warned. "This isn't how I plan to ask." "Ask anyway," she encouraged, her heart soaring. "Rebecca Davis," he said solemnly, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Not because I rescued you, not because of any obligation, but because I love you and can't imagine my life without you in it." The declaration of love, so plainly stated, brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Kyle, I will marry you." Because I love you too, and Whispering Pines has become my home in a way Boston never was. His smile was radiant as he bent to kiss her, his lips meeting hers with gentle passion. Rebecca melted into the embrace, all her doubts washed away by the certainty of his love and the answering certainty in her own heart. When they finally broke apart, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. "Mrs. Abernathy is going to be insufferably smug about this," he murmured. Rebecca laughed, joy bubbling through her. "She deserves to be. She saw what we were too stubborn to admit." Kyle tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his expression growing serious again. "There will still be talk, Rebecca. I can't prevent that." "Let them talk," she replied, echoing his earlier sentiment. "We know the truth of what's between us. That's all that matters." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky. Rebecca thought of the wedding dress still carefully folded in her trunk, the dress she had sewn with such hope for a different future. Perhaps it could still serve its purpose after all, though for a far worthier groom than she had originally imagined. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, a knowing gleam in her eye as she observed their clasped hands and radiant expressions. "Well," she demanded as they approached, "am I packing a trunk or planning a wedding?" Kyle looked at Rebecca, his eyes filled with love, then turned back to the housekeeper with a broad smile. "Better start planning that wedding, Mrs. Abernathy. If the bride agrees, I'd like it to be soon." "Very soon," Rebecca confirmed, squeezing Kyle's hand. "I find I've waited quite long enough for my happy ending." The old woman's face split in a triumphant grin. "About time you two saw sense. Now come inside before that stew burns. We've got plans to make." As they followed Mrs. Abernathy into their house, Rebecca thought with wonder Kyle leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Welcome home, Rebecca, for good this time." And in that moment, with his arm around her waist and the warmth of belonging filling her heart, Rebecca knew she had found not just a home but a future brighter than any she could have imagined when she stepped off that train in Willow Creek. 3 weeks later, under a perfect blue Wyoming sky, Rebecca Davis became Rebecca Warrington in a ceremony attended by ranchers, townspeople, and neighboring settlers from 50 miles around. She wore her wedding dress altered to reflect her new life and adorned with lace misses. Abernathy had been saving for the right occasion. As Kyle slipped a simple gold band onto her finger purchased on a special trip to Cheyenne, Rebecca met his gaze with certainty and joy. This was not the future she had journeyed west expecting to find, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have planned. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kyle kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and cheers from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their community as a married couple, Rebecca caught sight of Mrs. Abernathy dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, Hank beaming proudly beside her. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food, dancing, and more genuine good wishes than Rebecca had ever experienced. If some still whispered about the unusual circumstances of their meeting, such gossip was drowned out by the more compelling story of their obvious devotion to each other. Near sunset, Kyle led her away from the festivities to the spot by the stream where he had declared his love. The water glinted gold in the fading light, the pines whispering softly above them. "Happy, Mrs. Warrington?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely," she assured him, resting her head against his chest. "Though I still can't quite believe it's real." "It's real," he promised, tilting her face up to his. "And it's just the beginning." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Rebecca silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her west. What had begun as the darkest moment of her life had led her, improbably but perfectly, to the greatest happiness she had ever known. In the years that followed, Whispering Pines Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Rebecca's keen business mind complemented Kyle's ranching expertise, and together they expanded operations, building one of the most successful cattle enterprises in the territory. Their first child, a son they named Samuel, after Kyle's father arrived 10 months after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a daughter they called Elizabeth, honoring Kyle's mother. When their third child, a sturdy boy named James, completed their family 3 years after that, Rebecca felt her cup of happiness truly overflowed. The story of their unusual meeting became part of local lore, transformed over time from potential scandal to romantic legend. Young couples for generations would hear how Kyle Warrington had paid $200 at the train station not to buy Rebecca Davis, but to set her free, and how that act of liberation had led to the deepest love either of them had ever known. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard of the home they had built together, Kyle took Rebecca's hand, his thumb caressing the wedding band that hadn't left her finger since he placed it there. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. Coming west, all that happened. Rebecca looked at her husband, his face more weathered now but still handsome, his eyes still holding that special light when they gazed at her. She thought of their children, their home, the life they had created together. "Not for a single moment," she assured him, leaning over to kiss him tenderly. "The journey was difficult, but it led me exactly where I was meant to be." Kyle smiled, drawing her closer against his side as the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. "Welcome home, Rebecca," he whispered, echoing the words he had said to her that pivotal day by the stream. "I've been home since the moment you found me," she replied, her heart full. "And I always will be as long as I'm with you." In the distance, the pines whispered their agreement as night fell softly over the ranch, a home built on courage, redeemed by honor, and sustained by a love that had proven stronger than any obstacle fate could place in its path.